It was one of those days that seemed perfectly normal from the very start. The sun was shining warmly, casting a golden glow on the city streets. People moved up and down the sidewalks, chatting, laughing, and carrying shopping bags. The air was filled with the mixed scents of fresh coffee from a nearby cafe and the faint smell of street food from a food cart at the corner. Cars passed by slowly, their drivers tapping fingers on steering wheels as they waited for the traffic lights to change. Street performers played soft tunes on guitars, adding a gentle background to the lively afternoon scene. Angela Carter, a woman in her early 30s, stepped out of a local bookstore holding a small bag. She was dressed simply, a light blue blouse, black jeans, and comfortable sneakers. Her natural smile gave her a friendly and approachable look. Angela wasn't just anyone in the community. She was known for her kind nature and willingness to help others. She worked as a youth mentor at a local community center, spending her days guiding teenagers toward better opportunities. But right now, she wasn't thinking about work. She was enjoying a peaceful moment, walking down the street toward the grocery store to pick up a few things for dinner. Angela loved days like this. The weather was just right, warm, but with a soft breeze that brushed against her skin. She noticed children laughing as they chased each other near a fountain, their parents keeping a watchful eye while chatting with friends. A young couple walked past her, holding hands, sharing a quiet conversation. Everything felt calm and safe. She adjusted the strap of her bag and glanced into a bakery window where a tray of fresh pastries sat waiting to be served. She made a mental note to stop there on her way back home. It was small, everyday moments like these that made Angela appreciate life, the ordinary, peaceful parts of it. As she turned the corner, she noticed a street musician playing a soulful tune on the saxophone. The music seemed to float in the warm air, making people slow down to listen. Angela smiled politely at the musician, dropping a small coin into his open case. He nodded in gratitude before returning to his melody. Angela's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from her friend, reminding her about a movie night they had planned for the weekend. She quickly typed back, confirming she'd bring snacks, then slipped the phone away and kept walking. There was no rush. She had plenty of time before she needed to be anywhere. The buildings along the street were a mix of old and new. Some had been there for decades, their brick walls telling silent stories of the past, while others were modern, with glass fronts reflecting the afternoon light. Small shops sold handmade crafts, clothes, and trinkets, and their owners stood outside, greeting passersby. Angela waved at the owner of a tiny flower shop, an elderly woman who always arranged the most beautiful bouquets. Life seemed gentle in that moment, like nothing bad could possibly happen. The city's noise blended into a kind of pleasant hum. The chatter of people, the distant sound of traffic, the occasional bark of a dog. Angela's mind wandered to what she might cook for dinner. Maybe pasta, she thought, or perhaps roasted vegetables with rice. She stopped briefly at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to turn green. A group of teenagers stood nearby, laughing about something one of them had said. Across the street, she spotted a mother pushing a stroller while talking on the phone. It was all so ordinary, so familiar. Angela felt at peace. The day seemed like a perfect example of how life should be calm, kind, and full of little moments that often went unnoticed. She breathed in deeply, letting the fresh afternoon air fill her lungs. She didn't know it yet, but this peaceful walk was about to take a sharp, unexpected turn. Life had a way of changing in an instant, and before long, Angela's calm afternoon would be replaced by something tense, ugly, and unforgettable. But in that exact moment, she had no idea. She was simply a woman enjoying a sunny day, unaware that someone up ahead was about to bring darkness into the light. Angela had just stepped off the curb when she noticed something ahead that made her slow her pace, about 20 meters in front. Of her, near the entrance of a small convenience store, a man was arguing loudly with the cashier inside. His voice was sharp and full of frustration, spilling out of the open door and into the street. Even from where she stood, Angela could hear the words bouncing off the walls. The man was in his late 40s, tall, with broad shoulders and a weathered face that carried deep lines from years of hard living or hard anger. Maybe both. His hair was messy, his shirt crumpled, and his fists clenched as if holding back from doing something worse. A few passers-by paused to glance at him, but most kept walking. Not wanting to get involved, Angela didn't recognize him, but something about his energy made her feel uneasy. His tone wasn't just angry, it was sharp, almost poisonous, and there was an edge in his voice that hinted at prejudice. She caught pieces of his rant as she got closer. Words about people these days, and not like it used to be. Muttered with bitterness, she told herself it was none of her business. The cashier, a young man probably in his early 20s, was doing his best to stay calm, nodding and speaking quietly. But the man wasn't calming down. Instead, he stepped back from the counter, waved his arms in frustration, and stormed out. Onto the sidewalk. Now Angela was directly in his path. She shifted slightly to the side to let him pass, keeping her eyes down, not wanting to draw his attention. But as he walked by, he muttered something under his breath, something ugly, coded in racism. Angela froze for a moment. She had heard things like that before, unfortunately, but each time it happened, it carried the same sting. She thought about saying something, but decided against it. There was no point in fueling an already burning fire. She took a slow breath and kept walking, hoping he would move on. But he de-eyed single quotes, taunt. Instead, the man stopped, turned around, and stared at her. There was something in his eyes, not curiosity, not confusion, but a challenge. He stepped closer, invading her space. "What are you looking at?" he barked. His tone was sharp, laced with hostility. Angela didn't respond. She had learned long ago that sometimes silence was the best answer. But silence didn't sit well with him. It seemed to make him angrier. He took another step forward, now close enough that Angela could smell the faint scent of alcohol on his breath. His voice rose, and now the insults weren't just muttered. They were loud enough for people nearby to hear. Some pedestrians glanced over, but no one stepped in. It was the kind of uncomfortable scene where everyone hopes it will resolve itself without them having to be involved. Angela kept her chin up, her body calm, even though inside her pulse had quickened. She wasn't afraid exactly, but she was cautious. She knew situations like this could turn dangerous fast. Thought so? The man sneered, as if her silence was proof of something he believed about her. He shook his head in disgust, muttering another racial slur before turning slightly, as though to walk away. For a moment, Angela thought it was over. She exhaled slowly, ready to continue her walk. But then, in the space of a heartbeat, the man whipped back around toward her, and that's when the tension began to coil tighter, leading to a moment neither of them could take back. The moment Angela saw him turn back toward her, something inside her tightened. His eyes weren't just angry now. They were sharp, almost wild, as if he had decided she was his target. The busy street around them seemed to fade into the background. The sound of traffic, footsteps, and street chatter became a dull hum, while the man's heavy footsteps toward her seemed to echo louder than anything else. "Hey," he barked, pointing a finger at her. His voice cut through the air like a blade. Angela stood still, her gaze calm but alert. She didn't answer. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing her rattled, but his pace quickened. In seconds, he was only an arm's length away. People nearby slowed their steps, sensing that something was about to happen. Two women standing by the bakery entrance exchanged worried looks, but didn't move. "You think you're better than me?" the man hissed, his words dripping with venom. "Walking past me like I'm nothing, like you're something special." His tone carried the bitter edge of someone who had been waiting for an excuse to lash out. Angela didn't flinch. She had learned long ago to control her body language in moments like this. No trembling hands, no backing away. She kept her voice steady. "I don't know you. I'm just trying to go about my day." Her calmness only seemed to feed his rage. His jaw tightened and his hands curled into fists. "People like you," he said slowly, almost spitting the words, "think. You can just walk around like you own the place." Before Angela could respond, it happened. Quick, aggressive. He raised his hand and struck her across the cheek with an open palm. The sound of the impact was sharp and sickening. Her head turned slightly with the force, and for a moment, time felt suspended. Gasps erupted from the small crowd that had gathered. Some people instinctively stepping back in shock. Angela's cheek burned, but her eyes remained locked on him. She could see the smug satisfaction on his face, the way his lips curled upward like he believed he had proven some kind of point. He didn't expect her to do anything. He didn't think she would, but as she straightened her posture and took one step forward, something shifted in her expression, a look of quiet determination that made the man hesitate. He was expecting fear. He wasn't ready for what was coming next. Around them, a few people pulled out their phones. The hum of the street grew louder again, but now it was filled with whispers, murmurs, and the distinct click of cameras recording. The man sneered, as if daring her to respond. But deep in his eyes, there was a flicker, just the smallest hint of doubt. He had crossed the line. And Angela was no longer just a passerby minding her business. She was about to become something else entirely. For a few seconds after the slap, Angela didn't move. The sting on her cheek was sharp, but her mind was sharper. She could feel every heartbeat pounding in her ears, yet her face stayed calm, her breathing steady. She had been through enough in life to know that fear was exactly what he wanted, and she wasn't going to give it to him. The man stood in front of her, chest puffed out, smirking as if he had already won. Around them, a small circle of onlookers had formed, their expressions a mix of shock, discomfort, and anticipation. Some had their phones raised, recording every second. Others looked like they were ready to step in, but weren't sure if they should. Angela took a slow step forward. Her eyes locked on his. "Don't ever put your hands on me again," she said in a voice that was low but carried enough force to cut through the noise around them. Her tone wasn't shaky. It was steady, almost like a warning bell before a storm. The man laughed, a short, mocking sound. "Or what?" he challenged, leaning closer. His breath smelled of alcohol and stale cigarettes. He clearly thought she was bluffing. Angela didn't flinch. In a single motion, she shifted her weight to her back foot, raised her hands defensively, and remembered every lesson from the self-defense classes she had taken years ago. She had signed up for those classes for moments exactly like this, moments she hoped would never happen, but knew she had to be ready for when he moved forward. Again, reaching for her arm, Angela reacted instantly. She stepped to the side, grabbed his wrist, and twisted it sharply in a controlled motion. The man's smug grin collapsed into a grimace of pain as his knees buckled slightly. His eyes widened, clearly shocked that she had touched him at all, let alone with such precision. The crowd gasped, the sound rippling through the air. Angela didn't let go immediately. She kept her grip firm, pushing him backward just enough to break his balance without causing serious harm. "I told you," she said firmly, her voice now louder. "Don't touch me." The man staggered back, clutching his wrist, his face red with both embarrassment and anger. He tried to recover his pride by stepping forward again, but something was different now. The confidence in his stride had faltered. His eyes flicked toward the growing audience, realizing for the first time that he was the one looking weak. One man in the crowd shouted, "Leave her alone." Another voice called out, "We've got this on video." The attacker glanced around nervously, suddenly aware that his actions weren't happening in private. They were being documented, and the world was watching. That flicker of doubt from earlier had turned into something more visible now. Hesitation. Angela stood her ground. Her hands still up, her body language telling everyone that she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him, not of the moment. She was in control now, and everyone could see it. The man's jaw tightened, his eyes darting between her and the people filming. He muttered something under his breath, but his voice had lost the venom it carried earlier. His shock was setting in. This wasn't going the way he had expected. Angela knew this confrontation wasn't over yet, but the balance had shifted. He had tried to intimidate her, and instead, she had turned the tables. The man who thought he could silence her with violence had just been silenced by his own miscalculation. The man stood there rubbing his wrist, his face twisted between pain and disbelief. He had expected Angela to shrink away, maybe cry, maybe plead for him to stop. Instead, she had met his aggression with a calm but firm response that had rattled him more than he cared to admit. The crowd around them was no longer just passively watching. They were fully engaged now. The murmurs had grown louder, turning into clear voices of support for Angela. Someone in the back yelled, "She's not playing with you." Another shouted, "Walk away before you regret it." The energy on the street had shifted entirely, and the man could feel it pressing in on him. But instead of backing down, his pride made him double down. He straightened up, puffing out his chest like a man trying to prove he was still in control. His eyes locked on Angela, and he forced a mocking smile. "You think you're tough? You're nothing," he spat. His words were louder now, but they had lost their bite, almost as if he was speaking more for the audience than for her. Angela didn't respond. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was confidence. She kept her stance solid, her hands ready. She could see the way his movements had changed. No longer the quick, reckless steps of a man sure of himself, but hesitant, testing, almost unsure. Then, in an attempt to save face, he lunged forward again. But this time, Angela was ready. She stepped slightly to the side, letting his momentum work against him. Her left arm came up to block, and her right hand pushed sharply against his shoulder, sending him stumbling a few steps back. He caught himself before falling. But the sound of laughter from the crowd cut into him like a knife. That laughter was his undoing. He had come into this moment expecting to dominate, to humiliate, to walk away feeling like the stronger one. Now, he was the one being laughed at, and he couldn't stand it. His face turned a deep shade of red. He looked around wildly, realizing that nearly every phone in the crowd was pointed at him. This wasn't just an argument anymore. It was a public spectacle, and he was losing. "You all think this is funny?" he shouted at the crowd, his voice cracking with frustration. "You don't know what He stopped mid-sentence, when a man in the front row of onlookers stepped forward slightly, glaring at him. "We all saw what happened," the man said. "You hit her. Now leave." Angela kept her eyes on her aggressor, not letting her focus waver for even a second. Inside, her adrenaline was running high, but she controlled it, making sure every movement she made was deliberate. She knew that in situations like this, control was everything. The man shifted from foot to foot, clearly torn between walking away and trying to salvage what was left of his pride. But the weight of the stares, the judgment, and the camera lenses was heavy now. He knew the footage would be online within minutes, maybe even seconds. His image, his actions, his words, all there for the world to see. For the first time since the confrontation began, Angela saw something different in his expression: fear. Not fear of her strength, but fear of the consequences. Still, she didn't let her guard down. She knew some men like him became most dangerous when they realized they were losing. The air between them was tense, electric, like a storm about to break, and the crowd. They were no longer just witnesses. They were her shield, their presence making it harder and harder for him to make his next move. What Angela didn't know was that the moment of his final humiliation was only seconds away. The man's breathing had changed. It was heavier now, uneven, like a runner struggling after a sprint. His eyes darted between Angela and the crowd, searching for some way to regain control of the situation. But every time his gaze met hers, he found no fear there, only that calm, steady focus that had been unsettling him from the start. The street was no longer just a place where people were passing by. It had become an arena. The circle of onlookers had tightened, and their murmurs had grown into open commentary. Some were telling him to walk away. Others were calling for the police. A few were encouraging Angela to show him that she wasn't someone to be messed with. But the man wasn't ready to retreat. His pride was a heavy anchor, dragging him deeper into a situation he should have left behind minutes ago. With a sudden, frustrated growl, he took a step forward, raising his voice. "You think you can embarrass me like this?" In front of everyone. Angela didn't answer. She simply adjusted her stance, one foot slightly behind the other. Her weight balanced. Her body language made it clear. If he took one more wrong step, she was ready. That silence seemed to ignite something in him. In one fast motion, he lunged forward, his hand reaching out as if to grab her arm. But Angela's reflexes were quicker. She pivoted to the side, catching his wrist mid-air. Using the momentum of his own movement, she twisted it sharply downward. While stepping in close, her free hand came up, open-palmed, stopping just inches from his chest in a controlled push that sent him stumbling backward. The crowd erupted, gasps, shouts, even cheers. The man's legs wobbled, and he nearly lost his footing before regaining balance. But what hurt him more than the near fall was the sound of laughter rippling through the onlookers. "You just got played, man." Someone called out from the crowd. The man's face was now bright red. His jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might crack. His breath came in short bursts, and his fists opened and closed like he couldn't decide whether to attack again or give up. But his eyes betrayed him. They no longer held that same unshakable aggression. Now they flickered with uncertainty. Angela didn't move forward. She didn't need to. Her stillness was more intimidating than any advance could have been. She kept her hands up, not as a threat, but as a warning. The message was clear. She could end this if she had to. "You're done," a voice in the crowd said firmly. It was the same man who had stepped forward earlier. Two other bystanders stood beside him, their arms crossed. They weren't going to let this continue. The attacker's breathing slowed, his shoulders lowering slightly as if some of the fight had drained out of him. He glanced around, perhaps realizing for the first time that there was no escape from this without losing. Not just losing the fight, but losing his dignity in front of dozens of witnesses. And soon, thousands online. Angela didn't break eye contact. She waited. She knew the moment of decision was coming, the point where he would either cross a final line or turn away for good. The tension was so thick that even the city noises seemed to fade. It was just him, her, and the circle of strangers who had taken sides without hesitation. And in that heavy silence, the man finally made his choice. But it wasn't the one he thought he'd be making when this all began. Asterisk. The man's chest was still rising and falling quickly, but the fight in his eyes was fading. It wasn't that he had suddenly become reasonable. It was that he had nowhere to go. Everywhere he looked, there were phones pointed at him, recording every twitch of his jaw, every heavy breath. His earlier confidence had drained away, replaced By the weight of knowing the world outside this street would soon see him exactly as he was in this moment, Angela didn't speak. She simply stood there, her body still and ready, watching him like she was reading his next move before he even made it. That calmness wasn't just unnerving him anymore. It was dismantling him. Then, the voices from the crowd grew louder. "She stood up to you," one woman shouted. "You hit her, and now you're scared." Another man called out. The air was charged, but not with fear anymore. Now it was justice, collective and heavy, pressing down on him from every direction. The man tried to say something, maybe to defend himself, but his words drowned in the noise. The crowd wasn't going to hear excuses. They had seen the truth with their own eyes. From somewhere behind Angela, the distant wail of police sirens began to cut through the street. The sound grew louder with each passing second, and the crowd reacted. Some cheered. Others shouted that the cops were on their way. The man's head turned sharply toward the sound. And for the first time, his posture shifted from aggressive to defensive. He took a small step back, then another, like a cornered animal searching for an escape. But every move he made was blocked by the circle of people surrounding him. It wasn't that they were physically holding him. It was the presence, the disapproval, the silent wall they formed. One man in the front pointed directly at him. "You're not going anywhere," he said firmly. The crowd murmured in agreement. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. Angela remained exactly where she was. She didn't need to step forward or raise her voice. She had already won this battle without chasing him down. Every second he stood there, trapped and exposed, was another second his pride crumbled. When the police car finally pulled up, lights flashing, the officers stepped out and scanned the scene. Several bystanders began talking all at once, pointing to Angela, then to the man, showing their phones as evidence. One officer immediately approached her, asking if she was okay. She nodded, her voice steady as she recounted the moment he struck. The man tried to interject, but the officer held up a hand to silence him. "We've got plenty of witnesses," the officer said, "and plenty of video." That was when it truly hit him. This wasn't going to just disappear. He wasn't walking away from this with a story twisted in his favor. His actions had been captured, amplified, and now they were going to follow him as the officers moved to detain him. The crowd began to cheer. Not wild, celebratory cheers, but the kind of applause that carries relief, the sound of people seeing justice in motion. Angela didn't smile, but her eyes softened slightly. She hadn't set out to make an example of him, but that's exactly what had happened. The man avoided everyone's gaze as he was led toward the police car. The crowd parted for him, but not before a few people muttered their disgust under their breath. The phones kept recording, ensuring that even his walk of shame would be remembered. And Angela? She simply took a deep breath, letting the tension of the last few minutes slowly leave her body. She knew the moment wasn't over yet. There would be statements, reports, and questions, but the hardest part was behind her. The man who had struck her expecting fear now found himself surrounded by strangers who had witnessed his humiliation and his arrest. And the look on his face made it clear he never saw this ending coming. The flashing blue and red lights faded into the distance as the police car turned the corner, carrying the man away. Slowly, the crowd began to break apart, their conversations buzzing with what they had just witnessed. Some people were still showing each other the videos they had recorded, shaking their heads at the way it all began and ended. Angela stood for a moment, letting herself feel the weight of what had happened. Her cheeks still carried the dull sting from the slap, but the ache wasn't physical anymore. It was the heaviness of realizing how quickly an ordinary afternoon had turned into a test of her strength, not just her body, but her will. A woman from the crowd approached her, gently touching her arm. "You were amazing," she said softly. "You didn't back down." Angela gave a small, humble smile. "I just did what I had to do." She didn't feel like a hero, but she knew that. Standing up for herself mattered not only for her own dignity, but for everyone watching. By the time she finally made her way home, the incident had already started spreading online. Friends sent her links to the video, which had been posted on multiple social media platforms within minutes. The clip showed everything: the man's aggression, the slap, her calm defense, and the crowd rallying around her. The comments poured in. Queen energy. One person wrote, "This is how you handle hate." Another posted. Some shared their own stories of facing prejudice, while others praised her for staying composed under pressure. Within hours, the video had millions of views. News outlets began reaching out, asking for interviews. Civil rights groups and self-defense advocates reposted the footage, using it as a reminder that standing up to injustice, even in the moment, can send a powerful message. Angela didn't crave the attention. What mattered to her was the conversation it had started. People were talking openly about racism, about the importance of bystanders stepping in, and about how self-defense wasn't just about fighting back. It was about reclaiming your voice. That night, as she sat by her window with a cup of tea, she thought about the man's face in those last moments before the police arrived. The shock in his eyes wasn't just because she had defended herself. It was because the story, he thought, he was writing had been ripped from his hands and replaced with the truth. He had wanted to make her small, but instead, he had made her stronger in front of the whole world. Angela knew the world wasn't free from people like him. She knew there would be other days when ignorance and hate tried to show their face. But she also knew something else now, that courage, once shown, spreads. Those strangers who had surrounded her would remember that moment, and maybe, just maybe, they'd step forward faster the next time they saw someone in danger. She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of quiet pride. The man had thought his strike would leave her silent. Instead, it had started an echo that was still growing, bouncing far beyond that sunny afternoon. And somewhere, out there in the dark, he was sitting in a cell, replaying it all in his mind, still shocked that the woman he tried to intimidate had been the one to stand victorious.